Parasites and parasitic diseases are a hot topic these days. It seems everyone is concerned about parasites, even for their pets. But a broader conversation is this: what about parasites and cancer? Today's conversation is one of the top researchers on this subject. Fenbendazole as a possible cancer cure is on everyone's radar screen. Welcome to the Tenpenny Files, everyone. I'm your host, Dr. Sherri Tenpenny. If you've been listening to this show for a while, you know that we cover a wide range of topics to solidify your beliefs, offer solutions, and to introduce you to amazing products through conversations with authors and documentary filmmakers who challenge the mainstream media. My goal is to introduce you to topics you've never heard of or to topics you've always wanted to explore. Let the guests on the Tenpenny Files show you the way through their books, their research, and their films. Join me every day, Monday through Friday at 3 p.m. Eastern on the Tenpenny Files, as we hear from voices that have often been ignored, silenced, or censored, but truly have something important to say. Before we begin today's episode, I want to encourage everyone to become a Tenpenny Prime member. Prime members receive exclusive monthly content, recorded presentations, and an Ask the Expert masterclass that every month they just get a little bit better. To learn more, go to primemembership.drtenpenny.com, primemembership.drtenpenny.com to learn more and hopefully support our work. And one last thing, I want to welcome all of the first-time listeners here who've just learned about our show and are following the things that we do. And a great shout out of gratitude for everyone who's been following us for a while. We've been on this platform since November of 2025, but we've been doing podcasts for about 6 years. So we're grateful for all of you who have become regulars. Now let's get started. Today's conversation is with neuroscientist and real estate company owner, Dr. William Supple, about his important book, Cancer is a Parasite, Kill It with Safe, Over-the-Counter Anti-Parasitic Fenbendazole. The book that blends groundbreaking research and a visionary new model that redefines cancer as a parasitic process. Bill, welcome so much to the Tenpenny Files. Thank you so much for joining me this morning.
Excited to be here, Dr. T.
I'd love the introduction to your book and what got your attention to fenbendazole to begin with. Please share that story with our audience.
Well, this really was a necessity as the mother of invention type of story. So, I'm not an oncologist. I'm not an MD. I'm a retired neuroscientist and retired business owner. My wife and I are actually retired. And in October of 2021, my mother-in-law went in for a bowel obstruction and found out that she had metastatic breast cancer more or less everywhere. So it was in her lungs, her bones, liver. It was in so many different regions in her spine that they stopped counting. So anyway, she didn't want to, she was 83. She didn't want to endure the horrors of radiation and chemotherapy. So she didn't want to do anything. So at the time, I happened to be reading, it may have been a Mercola article, but embedded in the comments, it was a totally different article, had nothing to do with cancer. Someone said, try fenbendazole, it cured my prostate cancer. And that's really all it took to kind of get me down to where we are today. So I started to look into the science behind fenbendazole. And there was a lot of preclinical, exciting science that looked like, wow, this is the real deal. And the more we looked at it, as a family, my mother-in-law really had no reason to not try it because she wasn't going to do anything else. So she was so bad that for the 2-mile drive home, they weren't sure she was going to make it. So they gave her last rites in the hospital.
Wow.
So this is how bad it was. So read about fenbendazole, it kind of looks like a scary word, fenbendazole. So what it is, it's basically, it's an animal anti-parasitic. So you can buy this on Amazon. I actually bought the first batch at Tractor Supply up in Vermont, and I took it myself, thinking that if it's gonna kill somebody, it should kill me. Obviously, it didn't. So I sent a bunch down to my wife with her mother in Florida, and my wife took it 50% genetic match. We didn't want to make a sick woman sicker. So my wife took it, no side effects, nothing. It was a non-event. So the family and my mother-in-law's husband agreed to start treating her with it. And so what her husband did was mix 222 milligrams of fenbendazole into her yogurt every day, and she ate it every day. After 2, 3 weeks, she started to look better, feel better. She got some of her activity level back. Her appetite came back, and she looked a whole lot better. So after about a month, she felt well enough to fire hospice. She was kind of coming back to her own self. After 6 to 7 weeks, she was strong enough to go back to the oncologist, who had more or less closed the file on her, written her off. He didn't expect to see her again. So they looked at her blood tumor marker. So when she left the hospital in October, it was 316. So you can detect how much breast cancer there is by the proteins in the blood that encode for the cancer cells. And it's a linear function, more or less. The higher the number, the worse it is. So when she left the hospital, it was 316. When she went back to the oncologist about 2 months later, it was in half. It was, I forget the exact number, but I'll say like 135. So we knew something was working. And the only thing she was taking was the fenbendazole. So of course, she's feeling better. And, now she continues to take it. And and she goes back to the oncologist, and she continues to get the blood tumor marker. She did have 2 injections of fulvestrant at one point because he convinced her to do that. Because of the side effects, she stopped doing that. But she did have 2 injections of fulvestrant, which is an estrogen receptor blocker, which would never count for the dramatic results she had, but it may have synergized with it. And she also had some spot radiation in her spine for tumors that were giving her some pain. So those things, she did have some treatment, but nothing that would lead to this dramatic cure. So after about 3 or 4 months, her blood tumor markers dropped to below normal, which is below 38. And her breast cancer has been gone ever since. So, and she's getting ready to celebrate her 88th birthday the end of this month. So
it's like 4 years later now, right? 4 or 5
yeah,
years later.
yeah. So she's way out on any curve of survivability, especially for someone her age. So anyway, that started us going. So the news of her success spread rapidly. First, it was family, and they wanted to know how she did it. So we would explain what she did, and so you have this, you're regurgitating the same story over and over again, and then it became not just family, but then friends, and then friends of friends calling us all the time. So I decided to kind of stop the bleeding, so to speak, to do a Substack and put her case report out there so other people it would answer the questions that we've been answering. How did she do it? How come there were no side effects? All that sort of thing. And that, I didn't mention that. She had no side effects, none at all. So she got the best of both worlds. She got cured of her cancer with no adverse side effects. So it's almost too good to be true. But what I realized from doing all the research is it's really not too good to be true. It's exactly what the science says. Unfortunately, most of the science is preclinical, meaning it's done in the petri dish and in animal models, suggesting that it should work, but it's never been translated with fenbendazole to humans in any appreciable manner other than what we did with the Substack. So my mother-in-law was the first case. So I published that. And then other people learned from her experience, but also there's this hidden community of people who are already self-treating their own cancers with fenbendazole. So they started to write in and, hey, it worked for me too. So that's where I started to get all these case reports. And it's like, wow, this is really something. So um, I would get as much information as I could. And, a lot of people are just like, most of the case reports are, hey, it worked for me. And that's the beginning and end of it. I don't hear from people are very private about their uh, medical issues. So I understand that. But some people will want to tell their story, and they have, excellent records. And actually, three of our case reports were published by Dr. Makis, William Makis, in 2025. So they met the rigor of peer review in a journal called Case Reports in Oncology. Now, that was recently retracted, not for the science, but because Makis didn't disclose that he treats patients with fenbendazole. So they claimed that he had an undisclosed financial interest. If that was the standard, there would be no pharmacological
Like
studies published
consent.
in oncology. So they kind of shot themselves in the foot there. So it's really the best case report paper that's out there, because I got permission from the three people, including my mother-in-law, for the researchers to access their medical records, and they're all published anonymously. And it works. So, the good news today is there appears to be a legitimate cure for a lot of solid tumor cancers. And, that is in the good news category.
It's really, really good. I'm a good friend with Lee Merritt, and we're one of the five docs, and she's always talked about that parasites are what cause the cancer. And, I've read your book, and I've also listened to some other videos where they talk about that the inside of the parasite, there is a metabolic pathway that cancer cells have the same metabolic pathway. So that's the reason why fenbendazole kills the parasite, because of this blockage in this metabolic pathway. So therefore, that's why it works in cancer cells. And Leah said multiple times, back in the early 1900s, it was well known among pathologists that parasites did cause the cancer. I mean, where do we make the differentiation? And in my mind, it doesn't really matter. If there happens to be a parasite there and you kill it off with fenbendazole, or it's the same pathway and you kill the cancer cell with fenbendazole, the end result is success. So it's sort of like splitting hairs to me. But you as a scientist, how would you review that?
Well, I agree with your assessment that we're at the end. We've achieved the goal. That's killing the cancer.
Right,
Now we're actually in the process of working backwards to understand why.
right,
And what Dr. Merritt says has some validity. But the reason why I named the book Cancer is a Parasite is because, first and foremost, fenbendazole and other similar medications are anti-parasitic. So they kill parasites. That's their intended purpose. But because cancer cells, fortunately, by some act of God, have the same structural vulnerabilities that parasites do, these anti-parasitics kill cancer cells as well, using the same mechanisms.
right,
So in terms of, eradicating the problem, killing the parasite, killing the cancer, problem mostly solved.
right,
The theoretical issue is, does does the parasite itself cause cancer? Or my book deals with the nature of cancer. What is it? Dr. Merritt is talking about what causes cancer. I'm talking about what cancer is. Cancer is a parasite because it's vulnerable to antiparasitics, and two, it has all of the structural defects that parasites have, that is exploited by drugs like fenbendazole. And there are when you so I'm a neuroscientist, so we deal with theory, and theory determines your next experiment. Like, you have to have a plan. So what I did with fenbendazole and antiparasitics and cancer and parasites is I had to come up with a plan that I detail in the book. And the plan was, how similar are parasites to cancer cells. Because when I was doing the research, I would be reading into the body of the paper, and I would say, am I reading about parasites or cancer cells? And the 50th time I did that, I realized, wait a minute, these two things are the same. This could be about cancer or it could be about parasites. They're talking about the same mechanisms. I'm seeing it over and over again. So anyway, the point that I'm trying to make is that the nature of cancer behaves for all intents and purposes, just like a parasite cell, or just like a parasite. And so I tried to reject the hypothesis that where do they differ? So, so cancer cells are usually the somatic mutation theory of what causes cancer means that you have a cell that goes rogue. It's a cell of the self that becomes cancerous and becomes a problem in the body. So the origin of cancer is within the body, whereas the origin of parasites, obviously you pick them up somewhere else. That's the conventional wisdom. But what appears to happen is that as cancer has a lifespan. And at day one, it's very different than it is at day 365 or 2 years, 3 years down the road. So cancer evolves into a more complex entity than how it starts. So, and it becomes more and more like a parasite as time goes on. So what happens with cancer cells that in general is really changed my mind was biological, like all of our cells in our body have a biological clock that is entrained by our nucleus in our brain called the suprachiasmatic nucleus. Other animals are entrained by light and dark cycles, but every cell in every normal cell in the human body is in sync with each other. They all march to the same drummer. Cancer cells have developed their own biological clock. They run on an asynchronized rhythm, very similar to what a parasite does, because a parasite is its separate entity. It has its own biological clock. The clock genes are separate, and they evolve to make the parasite is a separate entity that infects the organism. Cancer becomes a separate entity over time that has its own biological clock. And it also has the chromosomal pattern of parasite cells. So parasite cells and cancer cells are the only two cells that have, if you look at a karyotype for chromosomes, they kind of line up the 23 pairs, like, Noah's animals going into Noah's Ark. So if you do that with a normal cell, that's what you're used to seeing. If you do it with a parasite cell or a cancer cell, it's a mess. It's called aneuploidy, karyotypic aneuploidy. And those are the only two cells that have that, parasite cells and cancer cells. So that's another way that they're very similar to each other that's relatively unknown. There's, people know about how parasites and cancer cells hijack the immune system so that they can hide among the other cells, and they camouflage themselves, and they hijack metabolic processes like the Warburg effect and defend themselves using a bunch of different mechanisms that are the same for cancer and parasites. So the two that I mentioned, the chromosomal aneuploidy and the unentrained biological clocks, are two lesser known similarities between cancer and parasites. So cancer is a parasite, and I think it's something that transitions from self to non-self. So the dimension is not there. It's an abstract dimension. The dimension of self is abstract. It doesn't exist. You can't measure it. It's an emergent feature that you can only see in what I call the Fenbendazole lens. And the great thing about Fenbendazole is it's an actual cure. So then you can take what you know about Fenbendazole And down the road will be ivermectin and mebendazole, and there's a lot of things that cure cancer. But with looking at the fenbendazole lens, you can say, well, wow, how come fenbendazole is so complete and lethal to the cancer cells with no side effects, yet all these standard of care treatments that are very similar to fenbendazole aren't? Why is it that fenbendazole eliminates the side effects? Well, you have to look at the structure of the other standard of care drugs, like the vinca alkaloids and the taxanes. They are actually based on the fundamental mechanism of microtubule disruption that fenbendazole is based on. And so whether they are knockoffs of fenbendazole or not is unknown.
Well, that's a great question.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
what makes me say that is like a lot of people think, gee, we've been trying to cure cancer for 100 years. Either we're really stupid or they're suppressing cures.
yes.
Right? I mean, you kind of have that like instinctual knowledge that we can't be this dumb.
So I'm going
with
to
all the money that we put into cancer. So so the whole idea of the Cancer is the Parasite book is to simplify what cancer is and to have a model that this is a bug that we can kill. And we already have the tools to kill it. But to kind of answer my own question, I'm sorry, I'm running on here. But back in as course of doing the research for the book, I came across a paper that had this word in it. Do you see oncology-related?
Mm-hmm.
So scientists in Brussels had discovered that an anti-parasitic that they actually gave this name to, oncology-related. Onco means tumor. Dazole is like fenbendazole. An anti-parasitic that they had developed, very similar to fenbendazole, that cured cancer in petri dishes in animals. But the way science works, and this was back in 1975, so 50 years ago. The way science works is what's being published is just the tip of the iceberg. Usually you're doing parallel experiments all simultaneously. So these scientists, when they originally discovered that they had a cure for cancer, it'd be like, the Far Side, where all the scientists are like, or Big Bang Theory, that's how they really are. So I used to be one.
So Bill, I'm going to have to hurry you up here a little bit. We're
Yeah.
coming up to a break, and I have a whole bunch of questions.
Sure.
What we want to go through here. So we're coming up on a hard break in just a couple of minutes. So why don't you finish your thought here? When we come back, we'll move a little bit quicker. So.
Okay. Yeah. Just basically, oncology-related as fenbendazole as a cure for cancer has been known for at least 50 years.
And they suppress the whole thing, and in your book you talk about they changed the name of oncobenzazole to other names, so they hid it for 50 years that we've known that this was a possibility. Let me ask you one quick question before we go to the break here. Fenbendazole is part of a family of medications in humans and animals called benzimidazoles. I think that's how you pronounce it. And you talk about, you list many of them in your book, and you describe what they are. Why is there so much emphasis, and make your answer short on this, so much emphasis on fenbendazole as opposed to the other ones?
Because it's inexpensive and you can buy it on Amazon. The other ones, mebendazole, you have to have a prescription to get it. That's the short answer. The longer answer is it appears that fenbendazole is actually the better substance compared to mebendazole, and we can get into that after the break if you want.
Yeah, it's but your explanation of all of those, and you show how they all also treat parasites in animals, just do a little better job than others. So we're going to hold your thought right there, and we're going to take a short break to hear from our sponsors. of AmericaOutloud.news. America Out Loud Talk Radio plays the Tenpenny Files on the iHeartRadio network every day, Monday through Friday at 3 p.m. Eastern. You can also listen to us anywhere in the world on AmericaOutloud.news, their media player. If you've missed any of these great conversations, you can find the Tenpenny Files on Spotify, Pandora, Apple, iTunes, and many others, and also on drtenpenny.com, on our website, on our Substack, and on all of our social media channels, which include X, Instagram, Rumble, and YouTube. We have a great message coming up from our sponsors. Please listen closely and support them if it's in your wheelhouse. That's what keeps them on board and keeps us online. Thank you so much for listening. We will be right back. Zeolite is a detox spray. We work specifically with a company called Touchstone Essentials. They are an incredible company. We've been working with them now for several years. And zeolite is a mineral that goes through your body like a one-way basket. It will clean out heavy metals such as arsenic and mercury, aluminum, cadmium, and it hooks onto those metals from a one-way perspective. So once it's bound, it goes out through your urine or your stools and doesn't get redeposited in other places. Everybody needs to have a detox product in their life, and this one is so easy to use and it's so safe. You can take it when you're pregnant, you can take it when you're nursing, you can give it to little children, you can even give it to infants, and quite frankly, I give it to my dog. I actually put a little bit of the zeolite in his water because until we all stop living in a toxic world, we all need to get some of those extra toxicities out, the heavy metals, the persistent organic pollutants, the things that are floating through the air, the different things that we come in touch with in our environment. And we are a big fan of zeolite from Touchstone Essentials. We've been a big fan of their products for several years. Go to drtenpenny.com/detox to get your first bottle of zeolite spray for $50 off.
Well, only when the government bows to the people will America become great again. This is Malcolm Out Loud here. Join me in pushing back against censorship, my fellow Americans. Right at the top of AmericaOutloud.news are the words: many voices, one freedom, united in the First Amendment. Now is our time, my fellow Americans. AmericaOutloud.news, liberty and justice for all.
Well, welcome back, everyone. Today's conversation is with Dr. William Supple about his very important book, easy to read, but a manual, a user's guide that anyone should get a copy of this and look through it for your present tense or potentially future of cancer health in your body or in your friends and family. The title of the book is Cancer is a Parasite. Kill it with a safe, over-the-counter anti-parasitic Fenbendazole. The book blends groundbreaking research, a lot of history, case reports, and creates a new model for cancer as a parasitic process. Let me give you a little bit of update, a little bit more information about today's guest. Dr. William Supple is a neuroscientist who contributed foundational work on the brainstem participation in learning, memory, and emotion. In addition to teaching standard brain behavior classes, he developed a popular sports psychology course at the University of Vermont. He dove into this through personal experience. Bill, welcome back to the show. I mean, we've got about 20 minutes left in the show, and I've got so many questions. So I really want to kind of move this along. Cancer, when goes into remission or is completely gone, I mean, you dare to say the cure word with fenbendazole because, most medical doctors are told not to say that. But if cancer goes into remission or is completely gone, do people continue to take fenbendazole as a maintenance program?
They do, and it really is a fantastic transformation. So a lot of the people in the case reports, and there's hundreds of them now. I just published 22 of them, but there's hundreds of them on in the Substack, and literally tens of thousands elsewhere. I'm not the only person doing this. Dr. Makis is publishing a lot of them, and some entity called One Day MD has about 400 specific case reports with all different types of cancer. And what was the question?
do people take it as a maintenance after their
Oh
cancer?
yeah. So the transformation is when people start this, they were basically given up for dead. They had gone through traditional treatment, and basically the doctor said, we can't do anything more for you. Then they discover fenbendazole. So a lot of these people were in what we call the throes of cancer stem cells, the cells that traditional treatment cannot touch. So they went from taking this animal anti-parasitic, gee, is it going to hurt me? Is it going to make me sick? To I need it to live. I absolutely need this stuff to continue to keep cancer away. Whether they need to do that or not, most people continue to take somewhat of a maintenance dose. They don't want to tempt fate. They don't want to upset the apple cart. The science just doesn't, we just don't know yet. All I can say with my mother-in-law with her breast cancer is it's completely gone. And there's a number of cases that it's completely eradicated. And I know oncologists are afraid to use the word cure because they don't have one.
Exactly.
And that's the problem, so they'll come in, I've dealt indirectly with hundreds of ex-cancer patients. And the first thing that an oncologist will say is, we can't cure you, but we can give you more time. The question is, what's the quality of that time? So a lot of people will wonder, are you advocating that people not do traditional treatment? Absolutely not. That's not what this is all about. This is all about identifying and recognizing that there is a low risk, potentially high reward treatment that people can do either under the guidance of a doctor, which is not happening right now, or they can do it themselves. They can self-treat. And people don't really care what works, just that something does work.
Exactly.
So if you're going to go traditional, and there's a lot of family dynamics where you can't be treating yourself with doggy dewormer. You can just add it as an adjunct. And what I'm hoping that this whole project accomplishes is that the powers that be will decide that fenbendazole is something that should really be looked at, not just because it's it shouldn't be ignored because it's an animal drug. It treats the condition, not the species.
Exactly.
And fenbendazole, as I said before, has some unique qualities that mebendazole, the human version, doesn't. So mebendazole was designed to stay in the gut to treat parasites. So it tends to be less systemically available. There are ways to make it more available, but all experimental still. Fenbendazole tends to be get into the bloodstream a lot better. So, we've had a number of glioblastoma cases. So clearly it passes through the blood-brain barrier. It's a very small molecular weight substance, so it can go through the skin. Some people are experimenting with DMSO as a carrier. So there's a lot of excitement. We just need to get the legitimate scientific community involved and study this, because it not only benefits the people with cancer now, it'll benefit their own families and themselves to have a legitimate cure.
We do a regular deworming on our pets, every month or every other month. Even in farm animals, they do deworming protocols. Somehow it's repulsive to Americans to think that they need to be dewormed. And
Right.
you talk a lot about, in your book, you list, I think it's 131 different countries. Is that number? 123 different countries that use anti-parasitics as part of their public health policy. They may not have quite the sanitation things that we're supposedly have here, like in India and Pakistan and some of the third world countries, but they use anti-parasitics regularly because they feel like they're exposed to the dirt and the soil and the things they eat and being around animals. But yet the countries, I think there were 23 or 24 countries that don't do that regularly, and they have a much higher cancer rate. And you talk about that in your book. So
Right.
it seems as though Fenben can be used not only as a maintenance program if you've already treated yourself and your cancer is gone, but to just use it periodically, maybe once a month. They say to take parasite drugs on full moons, and so
Right.
like once a month or once every other month to as a preventative. And you talk about that in your book.
Yeah, so there's a lot of moving parts in that question, but I can kind of circle back and kind of answer it in the order that might make more sense for people. The number one question that I get with fenbendazole and cancer is, will it prevent cancer? Should I take this preventatively? Even though I have a few or no risk factors. That's really a tough scientific question to answer because you can't prove a negative. So if you were taking jelly beans as a cancer cure and you didn't get cancer, you couldn't conclude that jelly beans prevented you from getting cancer. But sometimes we're just lucky. And we can answer that question because it was something occurring that's known as an experiment in nature. And the deworming protocols that you talked about in the developing countries, where they routinely deworm the population. India actually has national deworming days, February 10th and August 10th. Hallmark probably makes a card for it. It's a holiday. So they primarily deworm younger people, but also at-risk populations. So that, as you said, there's 123 countries that routinely deworm the population through mass administration of anti-parasitics like fenbendazole. The drug of choice there is something called albendazole, which is very similar to fenbendazole, but it's twice a year. And like you said, these countries, when you look at the cancer incidence rate, have half the rate of the countries that don't. And the countries that don't are places like the US, most of Europe, Australia, the more wealthier countries. So the question is, well, why don't we deworm the population? Is it that we don't have worms? No, we are infected. If you have pets, if you eat vegetables, the eggs are ubiquitous. They're everywhere. We are just as infected as anybody in India. And we've been whistling through the graveyard on this for quite a while. And actually, some CDC scientists in the 2012 era, led by Peter Hotez, do you know who he is? So he's kind of gained notoriety during COVID. So he did a series of studies, basically sounding the alarm that Americans have a parasite problem. And he estimated that up to 60 million Americans are infected by their cats with toxoplasmosis, sort of a thing, or toxogandhi or something like that. I forget the names of it. So, and he listed 5 or 6 other parasites that are epidemic. So the question is, why don't we treat for parasites in the US when we clearly have them? So the book goes into the detail that the epidemiological signal, the anti-cancer signal in the developing countries can't be due to geography, genetics, diet, climate, any of the other excuses that they use. The only thread that makes any sense is the population scale use of anti-parasitics with proven anti-cancer capabilities. So to answer your question completely and go back to Dr. Merritt, can the parasites being untreated in the Western world be causing cancer? Yes. What parasites do is they create, when you're infected with parasites, by definition, they are subthreshold, subclinical, and you don't know that you're infected. Obviously, if you knew you were infected, you would take action to get rid of them. They're designed to be occult and to fool you that they're there. So in people who don't treat for parasites, you are infected. You're fooling yourself if you think that they treat your dog every 3 months and you don't have the same parasites. The same parasites infect both of us. The issue is, why don't we do that? Well, I don't know why, but I would like to see Health and Human Services take a hard look at the infected, how widespread parasitic infections are in the US population, because I think it's a risk factor for cancer. So undiagnosed, untreated, subthreshold parasitic infections create chronic inflammation. And chronic inflammation is, in addition to age, the number one cause of cancer. So if you have chronic inflammation in your gut, in other areas, your immune system is always activated, and eventually it gets exhausted, just like with COVID mRNA shots. So it's the same sort of mechanism where you can become, it's a risk factor that would be easily treated. But depending on who you ask, there's a reason why we don't deworm the population in the rich countries, because that would kill the market for oncology drugs. So
There's that, and there's also the idea that, oh, that would mean there's something wrong with our food supply and put everybody on guard. But I think that what you said, to sum up a little bit about what you said, is spot on when you said that at the very least, at the very minimal, parasitic disease is a risk factor for cancer. That's at the lowest minimal end. And then the highest would be it actually contributes to cancer or causes cancer. Either way, if there's something as simple as mebendazole and fenbendazole and ivermectin to get it out of your body, why not? Are there any cancers that have been reported that are resistant to fenbendazole and don't respond?
Well, the blood cancers are treated quite well with existing therapies, so a lot of people will just go to traditional. What I've seen, the short answer is, if it's a solid tumor of epithelial origin, meaning the main cancers, lung, breast, prostate, colon, bone cancers, Fenben's effective. Now, that doesn't mean that it's going to be effective on all cancers. Most of the patients that have decided to self-treat went through traditional therapy. My mother-in-law is an outlier. She opted not to do traditional therapy, primarily because of her age. So she is, like, in my mind, the prototypical typhoid Mary of cancer, fenbendazole and cancer, because she had a more or less pure response, not confounded by traditional treatment. She did have the two minor treatments, but that would never account for her dramatic loss. So the other case reports had gone through traditional therapy. Obviously, they were terminal, given up for dead. Then they started fenbendazole. So there could be a latent, unappreciated interaction between the prior therapy and then fenbendazole later, which would be great. I mean, that would be, the science shows that fenbendazole potentiates just about every traditional treatment, whether it's radiation, the taxane, vinca alkaloid drugs that we were talking about before, but also the Chinese have found that it potentiates the immune checkpoint inhibitors like Keytruda. So the question becomes, well, what's doing the heavy lifting? Is it fenbendazole or is it the traditional treatment? And we kind of need to find out fairly. We have to give it a fair shot. We can't have Big Pharma do this research because they'll kill it in the cradle. We need to have people who are ethically motivated. We've been doing this crap for 100 years. And there are a number of cancer cures out there that are just suppressed and repressed. And that's bull. I mean, both of my parents died from, my dad died in 2017 from kidney cancer, and my mom from cervical cancer in 2003. That really pisses me off that this was known all this time. And it should piss everybody off who has seen somebody they love die of cancer. That's the bad news. We can't go back and fix that, but we can move forward. And, my message to Big Pharma is there's just as much money to be made in preventing people from dying of cancer and going on the preventative route, just make it work. I mean, what they're doing now does not work. It's failed. Change what you're doing. Look at anti-parasitics. Find
cancer.
out, answer the question that you just asked me. When doesn't it work? And I've asked on the website, on the Substack from day one, send me negative results. No one does.
I've interviewed other people that we've talked about conventional chemotherapy, and that the cancer cells become, because of their survival mechanism that you talked about their internal clock, they develop resistance to the chemotherapeutic agent. That's why in the first round the chemotherapy works and they can suppress all that, but the chemotherapy doesn't kill the cancer stem cells, which is another place that you talk about in your book where the fenbendazole works. It's the source cells. That's why people go into remission and then they have a recurrence, because what actually caused the cancer, the stem cells, are still alive and they cause this recurrence, and they become resistant. The second round, they've developed a resistance mechanism that they fight against the chemotherapy, but that doesn't happen with fenbendazole, which is another reason why your book, Cancer is a Parasite, Kill It with the Safe Over-the-Counter Anti-Parasitic Fenbendazole, is so incredibly important. And we only have just a few minutes left on our conversation here today, Will. I want you to tell people, and I think we've done a pretty good overview of what fenbendazole is and why people should take a look at this. But why should people tell people why they really should buy your book and have it in their personal library, maybe even a couple of copies, so that when they need it and they need to give it to a friend or a family member, they've got an extra book right on hand. Tell people why they should have that in their library.
Well, I think primarily because it explains from start to finish what fenbendazole is all about. And I think, if you want to self-treat or help a loved one self-treat, you kind of have to have the information handy. You can get a lot of it online, but you never know. It's organized in a way that's meant for the general public. So I think that's one reason. Two, it kind of explains why your doctor doesn't know about fenbendazole. And it's not your doctor's fault. It's that it's been suppressed. Your doctor is a victim of this suppressed information as well. That your doctor would heartily endorse fenbendazole if it was FDA approved and that it was because it's effective. So we have dotting the I's and crossing the T's left to do. And I'm hoping with the new administration that we can fast track fenbendazole and mebendazole and ivermectin and actually come up with cancer treatments that actually work. And we are there now.
Have you had an opportunity to speak with Marty Makary, head of the FDA, or Jay Bhattacharya at the NIH, or even Secretary Kennedy, or get your information from your from your Substack, which is just amazing. There's so much information there, and then you've sort of condensed it into this book that's so very readable. Have you had an opportunity to get this into the hands of any people at the highest level of our government?
Well, my publisher is Skyhorse, and Skyhorse publishes RFK Jr.'s books. So I'll just leave it there.
Well, yeah, and he and Bobby are good friends. I'm part of Maha Action, and I go down to DC. I've spent more time in DC in the last year than I have my whole life, going to those meetings and talking to people. So that's really, really good news of what they can get it into the hands of that.
Yeah.
Tell people what your how to access your Substack, because your book is really good. Your Substack is more accessible, obviously, because it's electronic to people. Tell people where they can reach your Substack and read about that.
Yeah. So the web address is fenbendazole.substack.com.
And I
fenbendazole.substack.com.
love your pen name of Ben Fen.
Yeah. Well, this is what, so a lot of people want to know what Fenbend looks like. So you can buy it on Amazon like this. That's what my mother-in-law used. I'm not endorsing any brand. There's a lot of them on there. And, this is another version that's made in the US. And then there's actually a cream, fenbendazole cream that I actually use on
Topical things.
squamous cell cancers that I get because I'm in the sun a lot. So I just put it on, it'll dry up, turn red, dry up, flake off, and it's gone. So it treats topical cancers as well.
You actually talked about that in your book about using the topical creams, maybe mixed in with a little DMSO for as a carrier to have put it into the cells a little bit more directly. And it treated a woman that you talked about in the book that had a cancer on her finger, and it really cured things and really took things away. So that's really good. I'm glad that you showed those things because
Yeah.
that there's a variety of options.
Right. Sorry to interrupt you, but to kind of complete the whole circle, there's also a chapter in there on fenbendazole curing cancer in dogs, because you would expect that. It's a anti-parasitic that's meant for dogs, but like I said before, it treats the condition, not the species. So it's perfectly reasonable and expected that fenbendazole would eradicate, cure cancer in dogs as well. And I have those case reports in there as well. And people are crazy about their dogs, and they feel, hey, if I could save them from this terrible affliction, I'm going to do it. So I get a lot of animal questions as well.
Absolutely. We love our pets sometimes more than our children, I think, because they always love us and they don't mouth back and they don't make a mess and all those sorts of things. Well,
Right.
Paul, this has just been incredible information for our listeners here today, because it's so very important to get this information out. It's just been suppressed and hidden for 50 years in the medical literature, but it's still even been suppressed in the mainstream media, even during COVID and all those things.
Yeah.
Dr. William Supple, in your book, is so incredibly important. Cancer is a parasite. Kill it with safe over-the-counter anti-parasitic fenbendazole. We have it available in our bookstore. All of our guests that we interview, authors and documentary filmmakers, all of their books are in one place. If you can go to bookstore.drtenpenny.com, bookstore.drtenpenny.com, just to make it easy. You can find it there. You can find it also in other places where books are sold. So I want to thank you so much for being with us today and sharing this incredible information. I hope you keep it up and keep on Tony to get this information in front of Bobby, because it's really important. It needs to be there and put into the NIH and to the FDA for sure. So I want to thank with that, I want to close out with one of the favorite verses in the Bible. I close all of my podcasts with, whether they are live or pre-recorded, which is Romans 12:12. Rejoice in hope, be patient in trouble, and be persistent in prayer, and get your fenbendazole and pre-treat yourself and your dog, and to make sure that this cancer doesn't come into your life, and that this is a gift from God. Use it. Use it and take it seriously. So thank everybody for listening. Thank you everybody for being here. We'll see you tomorrow or the next time right here on the Tenpenny Files at 3 p.m. Eastern, Monday through Friday. Thank you so much, everybody. Have a good rest of your day. Goodbye and God bless.